Welcome, Big Ten fans. This is Big Ten Ted Live. We are live on a Wednesday night. Another edition of Big Ten Ted Live is coming your way. And, you know, it's kind of funny because at the start of this week, you know, I'm going, oh, man, there's not a ton of news. There's not a ton of news out there, at least in Big Ten country. In other parts of the college athletics and college football world, there was news. But really, as it pertains to the Big Ten, there wasn't a ton of news. So I went out into the BTT Nation, into the Big Ten TED Nation, and said, what do you want to talk about this week? And I was able to pull down two topics for tonight's program. And we're going to get into those topics and some other mini half topics, some other news that always comes up. It's the off season. College football is obviously very popular, and you always seem to get news. Something always comes up when you do a weekly show every Wednesday night, like is happening here on Big Ten TED Live. So we got a two big topic show here tonight. Just a reminder, if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you know when we're going live, get notifications when we upload a video, shorts, polls, all that kind of stuff. It is the place for the Big Ten fan to interact about all things Big Ten here on Big Ten TED Live, and you can interact with the show here tonight via a chat or via a super chat here tonight. If you want to talk about something that's on your mind, maybe take the discussion in a different direction, a chat is a great way to do that here as this show progresses. All right, so here's our two topics for tonight's program. All right. Topic number one, we're going to talk about what are the Big Ten non-conference games that you and me are really looking forward to seeing this season. There is a solid slate of non-conference games involving Big Ten teams. We're going to get to that in the first big topic of the show. I want to thank John Kottmeyer for the idea on that one. And then our second topic here tonight, can the Terps break out in 2023? Can they even make a New Year's Six Bowl? Want to thank Crab Cakes and Football. Yeah, you can probably guess where that allegiance lies. You can say Crab Cakes and Football for that second idea here today. Before we get into, we are going to talk about the announcement that came on hours before we came on the air here this evening. We are going to talk about the announcement of the upcoming Thursday night on the Big Ten Network. They're going to reveal opponents. They're going to reveal a scheduling model for Big Ten football. And I am going to talk about that. I'll get to that here in just a little bit. Just want to do a few more housekeeping notes before we really get underway here tonight. Just a reminder, starting September 3rd, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central, during football season, it's the Big Ten Sunday Sound-Off, where we've had some time to decompress over what happens on the weekend, what happens on Saturday, come back and talk about all the games and all the things that happened on the Big Ten football weekend. So that starts September 3rd live, Sundays, 9 Eastern, 8 o'clock Central as well. One other housekeeping note I want to talk about here today in terms of this show, in terms of the Wednesday night Big Ten TED Live show. I think I'm going to be getting a little help. Sometimes it takes a lot. It takes a lot of lung capacity for talking for 2 hours, sometimes 2 hours plus. So contacted a few guests of other YouTube shows, podcasts, that kind of thing. So when we talk about maybe team-specific topics, going to have some of those guys come on the show and kind of we can go back and forth about some of those topics in terms of team-related things as well. So I've got a group of 5, not the Conference USA, not the Sun Belt, but I got a group of 5 guys right now that are slated that say, yeah, oh, come on, we can talk about some things. We got Tim Prangley from Trojan Conquest. Want to give a big shout out to him. Maybe talk some USC stuff here on the channel in the future. Got a couple of Locked On guys, Ryan Herring from Locked On Badgers, Kane Robb from Locked On Gophers. You look at John Johnston over at Coronation talking some Husker stuff. I've had him on the channel before. So that, maybe talking some Huskers with him as well. well as the Big Time Boiler has a Purdue channel as well. If you got anybody else that you'd like to see on this show, on this channel, for other segments across the Big Ten, team-specific channels, please leave that in the comments. Very excited to kind of get other people on this live stream as well as we kind of continue on here. A solid 10 to 15 minute break talking could do me a lot of good. All right, folks, let's get into it. This was announced, this was posted on Twitter by the Big Ten Conference, by the Big Ten Network. The 2024-2025 Big Ten schedule, the scheduling model, and the opponents, right? When the NFL, you kind of look up the schedule. Oh, we're going to play these teams at home. You're going to play these teams on the road. That will be announced. That will be announced tomorrow, Thursday night, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 3:30 p.m. Central. Working late on that night. So I'm probably going to have a reaction to this announcement, a video on the channel, most likely on Friday morning sometime. So make sure you look out for that. So there's a lot of things being thrown around right now in terms of scheduling, in terms of what this may look like in the future. Right now, according to Cole Auerbach, there's a leader in the clubhouse. This on Twitter. The Big Ten will announce its new scheduling model. Oh, we know this, 4:30 Eastern on Thursday. Multiple sources tell The Athletic the Flex Protect model is the front runner. Schools have had 1, 2, or 3. So they could have 1 protected game, 2 protected games, maybe up to 3 protected games, and cycle through everyone else. No divisions. We've kind of known about the no division thing for a while. Okay, and that's been expected, but we're going to find out tomorrow exactly what it's going to be going forward, all right? So when I thought about this, I was on the Twitter sphere, right, when I was reading Nicole's tweet here, and I decided to tweet myself. And here are the must-plays. When I think about the 14 schools in the Big Ten Conference, I believe these are must-plays. Also, take into consideration when I sent this tweet out, I had exactly 0 characters remaining. So we don't have Michigan State and Indiana for the old brass spittoon. You could maybe throw that game on here. You don't have Penn State and Maryland. I know that's a series that has some history. That kind of dates back a little bit, even though that series is fairly one-sided in favor of the Penn State Nittany Lions. Look, I know these things. I understand these things. Kind of back and forth. But for me, this is the list of must-play games in the Big Ten Conference. Iowa's the only team on this list with 3 teams. I don't think on an Iowa schedule you can leave out the Battle for the Bowl. You can't leave out the Heartland Trophy against Wisconsin. That's a long-standing series that often determines a lot in terms of the Big Ten Conference and the Big Ten standings. Minnesota, you can't. Floyd Rosedale, right? One of the best trophies in the game. You got to keep that on a yearly schedule. Nebraska, that has turned into probably Nebraska's biggest rivalry in the Big Ten Conference. So I don't think you can turn down any of those. I honestly don't think you can turn down any of those for the Iowa Hawkeyes. I think you got to play Wisconsin, you got to play Minnesota, and you got to play Nebraska every single season. When you look at other yearly games, or I look at Nebraska, I look at them and I honestly believe their only yearly game that they have to play, a must-play game, is against the Iowa Hawkeyes. You maybe look at Wisconsin. I don't know maybe if that's developed. It seemed like maybe in the Pelini years that was developing into something, but that really hasn't stuck in terms of a big-time rival. Like you see that game played every other year, and that's fine. Minnesota, kind of the same boat there for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. You see a lot of these rivalry week, last game of the season type of games. Now notice, I don't have Penn State and I don't have Michigan State on here. No land grant trophy game on here. Once again, I don't see that as a game that I need to see every single season. If I don't see Penn State and if I don't see Michigan State during a given year, I'd be like, okay, yeah, we'll get it next year. We'll do it every other year. Not every trophy game needs to be played every single season. And I think Penn State and Michigan State is in that as well. I think I just don't see it. Like you look at Penn State on this tweet, Ohio State. I put Penn State and Ohio State on there because as a fan, that game is an absolute banger every time the Nittany Lions and the Buckeyes get together. It seems like every time they play, it is an absolute classic. It is an absolute phenomenal football game when Penn State and Ohio State play. They've had great games over the years. It's turned into a battle. Like, you go back to Penn State when they came into the Big Ten in the early 90s. Where do they sit right now? Where does Penn State sit in terms of rivalries? I think that's a big question that needs to be asked. By default, they've put the Michigan State game. I know they played Maryland at the end of the season a few times when Maryland was in the conference, but that's been a fairly one-sided game. You kind of see what I'm saying? I think you got to keep Penn State and you got to keep Ohio State on there as well. You got Michigan and Michigan State. I said you could maybe put Michigan State with Indiana, but I ran out of characters here, and that one unfortunately did not make the cut. You know, if I had unlimited characters on Twitter, that probably would have gotten onto this tweet, Michigan State and Indiana for the old brass spittoon. But when you look at must-play games, I think these are the ones that really stick out, at least in my mind, in terms of games that we need to see every year. Tony Petitti appeared on the Rich Eisen show talking about preserving rivalries. And rivalries are very important to the future scheduling model of the Big Ten Conference. I'm very curious to see, let's say this is what sticks, and then you just got USC and UCLA playing each other and everybody else rotates. I'm very curious to see how this all works out, right? If one team has 2 protected games, another one has 1, and another team has 3, how does that rotation work? Can they play every team within a 2-year period? I think that's what we want to accomplish within this scheduling model. So I want to hear what you guys think about this, because I want to open the floor up as soon as I can right now about this scheduling model. Because if one team has 1 protected game, that leaves 8. That leaves 8 possible openings. 8 possible games that they could play. That could be different teams, a rotation that could really be set, and that really could be put into motion. This is a very interesting announcement. I'm going to have my reaction to this on Friday morning. Again, I have a video on the channel on Friday morning. I'm very, very interested to see how this goes down. Before I get into your comments, I want to mention one thing. About this. Does unveiling because it seems like we can't get through a show in the off season, right? We talked about the topics that we're going to talk about today, big non-conference games. We're going to talk about can Maryland break out, right? On the field stuff, X's and O's, Jimmy's and Joe's type of stuff. But you can't get through a show in the middle of June without talking about realignment. You just can't. You can't get through it. Does this scheduling announcement mean that the Big Ten is not expanding? I think that's reading between the lines kind of thing. And I know rumors, there are things going every which way. Couple of days ago, Colorado has a meeting. They schedule another one. Looks like Colorado's going to the Big 12. Stuff comes out today. Well, wait a minute. The Pac-12's got a grant of rights that verbally agreed to. I just can't. I can't anymore. I can't. We need to come up with a solution. But when I look at this scheduling, when I look at this announcement, this at least tells me for the time being, doesn't look like any at least immediate future expansion for the Big Ten Conference may be into play. And I said that a long time ago. Maybe, hey, it'd be cool to see Oregon. It'd be cool to see Washington, even though they're maybe not as a type of a home run type of value as USC and UCLA. But we'll see. That's the first thing that popped into my mind is I think if there were, especially with all the turmoil and back and forth going on right now with Colorado, Pac-12, Big 12, grant of rights, that type of stuff, with all that stuff happening, maybe they would have waited on this a little bit. But now they're coming out with this. And I'm going to see what the scheduling model is and if that really puts the kibosh on Big Ten expansion, at least for now, in terms, at least Oregon is concerned, Washington is concerned, maybe other West Coast teams are concerned right now. Right, originally I did a video and said, what's the Big Ten going to look like, in 2030? At the end of the TV deal, I said, well, USC and UCLA now, then Oregon and Washington, then and go on from there. And that might be how this all ends up going. So timing on this is very interesting. Let's get into some comments. Here today, Erica Goldberg, resident Hawkeye fan, checking in here tonight. Joey, got a Penn State fan in the house. Nittany Lion fan in the house. Hopefully Michigan will be a Penn State protected game as well. When I look at potential protected games in the scheduling format for the Penn State Nittany Lions, I think you got to look at the Ohio State game. Maryland, there's some history behind that, although I don't think Maryland would complain if they didn't have to play Penn State every single year. I think they'd be okay with that. I think they'd be okay. And we'll talk about Maryland a little bit later in the program here tonight. Michigan, it's been a good series. I think Ohio State has been a more competitive, a better series in terms of better football games on the football field, but you could see Michigan be one of those games. Remember, I think those protected games are going to be those must-play games, those big rivalries in the Big Ten Conference. Tim Prangley, Trojan Conquest, check it in here tonight for a little West Coast flavor for the show here tonight. Badger and Bournemouth fans seeing maybe not for the Cannon game, maybe not Purdue and Illinois as a big deal. I think that's one that has a lot more history than a lot of people think. I think that's one that if you play it every other year, would it be fine? Probably, but that's one that really stuck into my mind, especially as of late. Purdue beating Illinois this past season really put the Big Ten West Championship in Purdue's hands and took it out of Illinois' hands. I think maybe the recent history really stuck into my mind out of that as well. Immaculate checking in. How about that amazing Ohio State, the Illabuck Trophy game, Ohio State and Illinois. Once again, since we've split off in East and West, I'm not sure I forgot where these two teams were in the Leaders and Legends days, but this has not been a game that has been played on a yearly basis, and I don't know if it needs to be played on a yearly basis. I think with the 9-game conference schedule and rotating games, this game will be played probably around every other year. Ohio State and Illinois, as a lot of games will be played every other year. And you got to think they want to build up and get some good games on the West Coast as well with USC and UCLA and give those new teams some value out there on the West Coast as well. Tony, more from Tony. Really, we have none of the Big Ten. This is talking about Penn State rivals. Pitt is really the other rival, and I don't know if Pitt and Penn State, that's kind of a tongue twister. Pitt and Penn State really play all that much anymore in the non-conference slate as well. Remember Penn State, before they were in the Big Ten, at least for football, this was one of those Eastern independents. Remember Florida State, Miami, Penn State, I guess Notre Dame you could throw in there as well. Pitt, I believe, there was a handful of other teams, those Eastern independents that were in there. And Penn State, they developed rivalries over time with more regional schools. West Virginia, they had a series. I mentioned Maryland. I think Syracuse had a series, something like that. So they had series with some of those other teams, but in terms of rivals, since they've gone on to the Big Ten Conference, they really haven't developed a big, like I said, Ohio State, that's not a trophy game. They've had really good games, and it's been a good series. How much do they hate each other back and forth? I don't know. I don't know in terms of the rivalry sort of portion of that discussion. Tony chiming in. Tony, thanks for being here tonight. I think the Big Ten will keep Michigan State, Penn State together for the last game of the season. And I think that could happen as well. Like, you could see a lot of, you got to have these rivalry games. You don't have to, but it's been this way for at least a handful of seasons that you've had Penn State and Michigan State. I can't remember. I went back and looked at some schedules. I know Penn State was playing Maryland in the last game of the season, I think. That would have been Michigan State playing Rutgers as well, and it kind of made more sense to kind of go the other way with things as well over there. Thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. News kind of came in late this week. A little bit late this week, but that's fine. That's fine. Illini for life, giving his take on the Illinois-Purdue on the Cannon game. Only 95 miles between the two schools, and they play for the Cannon Trophy game. I threw it on there. You could probably throw some other trophy games on there as well, but I want to see Purdue and Illinois. A lot of these is going to depend on where the athletic directors, who they want to play every single year. I think that has an impact on this as well. Tony chiming in. He thinks 366. Right? We showed the tweet from Michelle Nicole Auerbach at the beginning of the live stream. She thinks a flex protect model, you could have 1, 2, or 3 protected games. But Tony thinks a 3-6-6. 3-6-6 seems fairly like a good idea. It seems like a good idea. But then a lot of times I put a 3-6-6 graphic together. This was months ago of what, and then on some of these, I'm not going to lie, you're kind of reaching. You're kind of reaching on some of these. It's like, well, are they really rivals? Do we need to see Indiana and Rutgers every year? So maybe that's where the Big Ten scheduling committee is coming in with this flex protect type of model as well. More here. Immaculate thinks just the opposite. This is a much more agile scheduling methodology. I think opposite in terms of 3-6-6, I think is what he's talking about here. This is a much more agile scheduling methodology. You could bring in new schools and schedule them against. So, you're thinking opposite in terms of expansion, I think is what he's going with here. This is a much more agile scheduling methodology. You could bring new schools and schedule them against the schools that have less rivalry games locked up. Yeah, okay. I'll take it. I'll take that. I'll take that. That's a good point. That's a very good point. I'd have to see the model first. I'd have to see exactly, where the strings are and where everything's being pulled, so to speak, and see where everything lines up. Once I see it, then I can see, well, Oregon could fit here, Washington could fit here, I could see that happen. Next few weeks are going to be crazy in terms of conference realignment. I will give my thoughts on that here after the scheduling stuff is done, because I think it needs to be talked about, because there is a domino effect for the conference. There is a domino effect for the Big Ten on what's happening kind of in the Pac-12 and the Big 12 right now. Landon Felix checking in. I don't see the Big Ten making Ohio State play both Michigan and Penn State every year. As a PSU fan, I'd be very mad if they continued to make us play both Ohio State and Michigan every year. And that's another thing with ADs. How many of these really tough games, if you're one of the big boys in the conference, are you going to want to play these types of tough games every single week? I think that's a question that needs to be asked. Because in my 3-6-6 scheduling model, I have for Michigan State, I had them playing Michigan. I had Michigan State playing Penn State, and then I had them in a rivalry game against USC, right? Spartans versus Trojans. That's what I had that's tough for Michigan State. You got to play Penn State every year. You got to play USC every year. You got to play Michigan every year. I think that's maybe where the 3-6-6 kind of comes into play, where maybe things don't exactly line up. Now, you can even it out. You can balance it out a little bit, but I think that remains to be seen. What's going to happen over there. Tony checking in. I believe the schedule will be for 2 years. It'll be 2024 to 2025 is what the graphic was tweeted online. I'll pop it up once again. This was the graphic that was tweeted 2024 and 25. So I think it is for the next 2 seasons. This kind of makes sense because they only play, they don't play postseason obviously until or they don't play in January, I should say, until the end of the season. So by that, it looks like this is going to be for 2024 and 2025, which would be the next 2 seasons, obviously. A couple of fanhoods to shout out to. Hawkeye fans in the house. Boy, there has been a lot of this on Twitter lately. I'm sure Tim knows better than anybody. There has been a lot of fight on. It is official visit season time. Did a video about that as it pertained to Wisconsin and Nebraska early in the week. Man, USC is killing it. USC is killing it right now. Might do something with that later on because I've mentioned before many times on this channel, LA recruiting is going to open up. USC is going to do better in recruiting because now they're playing in a more prestigious conference, got a better TV deal. Oh, they have a TV deal kind of thing, more exposure, all that sort of stuff. I think both, it's beneficial on both fronts for USC and for the rest of the conference. But USC, been seeing a lot of V for victory up on the Twitter sphere. Big props to you, Joey. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you for supporting the channel here tonight. Penn State opens up the season against West Virginia on Big Ten Saturday night. Can't wait to see that game. Can't wait to see the Emmy Award winning presentation on NBC Sunday Night Football kind of come over to Saturday nights as well. So thank you, Joey, for the super chat. And we are. All right, let's move on. Move on a little bit. Lewis Pap checking in here tonight. July 1st. 1st of July, we'll be hearing about Oregon and Washington in the Big Ten, according to Lewis. It's going to be a crazy June. It's been a crazy June, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be insanity. I think these next few weeks out in Big 12 and Pac-12 country, there's going to be a war. Man, I read Twitter. I scroll through Twitter. And if you were able to hologram yourself into other Twitter accounts, I think there might be fistfights breaking out between the Big 12 people over here and the Pac-12 people over here and reports over here and reports over here. Because, man, there's some serious dissent between some people out there on Twitter, man. And, like, we're talking about college sports. We're talking about realignment. We're talking about things we all love. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Teams are going to go where they're going to go. We'll talk about that here maybe as the show progresses. Thanks, everybody, for being with me here tonight. A couple of topics here tonight. Going to be talking about the big non-conference games that the Big Ten has. Man, there are some doozies. It's a solid non-conference slate. Going to be talking about my 6 couple of honorable mentions that I think are some of the big non-conference games and what they'll mean to Big Ten teams. So we're going to be talking about Maryland. Can they break out in the Big Ten Conference this season? Is this year the year of the Terp? Going to be talking about that. John Berger checking in. He's in the middle of something, but I appreciate you for being here. Listen to every episode on Wisconsin from John Berger. We've got a Badger fan in the house. You talk about recruiting. Wisconsin, sound the recruiting cannons. Luke Fickle's been active on the Twitter the last couple of days. A couple of 4 stars landed in Madison, Wisconsin. They've got some other big-time targets out there. Talked about it in my Wisconsin-Nebraska official visits video. Check it out from earlier in the week if you haven't already. But this is big official visit time, right? For new head coaches to really lay the groundwork of their programs, especially Fickle and Rule at Nebraska. This recruiting class is so big to how the future of the conference is going to look down the road. Illini for life checking in here tonight. Who are some good potential protected Big Ten rivals for USC and UCLA? Other than themselves, I talked about USC, Michigan State, Spartans, Trojans, right? There's a very easy trophy there. A big spear. One side of it is green. One side of it is maroon or gold. Maybe the winner spears it into the field at the end of the game. There's something there. People smarter than me are going to figure that out, but there's something there with USC and Michigan State. In USC, you look at, they've played Michigan in Rose Bowls. They've played Ohio State in Rose Bowls. They played Ohio State in a non-conference series before. I want to say, was that the mid-2000s? The Pete Carroll era? Maybe Troy Smith had an Ohio State game against the USC team. Let's get stats and info, a.k.a. the Big Ten TED viewers on that. But yeah, I think there was a non-conference home and home maybe in there as well. USC in the late 2000s, early 2010s, I want to say, had a home and home with Nebraska as well in there. Let's talk UCLA. I think the tougher one. I think USC has had home and homes. They've had Rose Bowls. They've had games against other teams. USC, I'm not worried about. They're going to form rivalries, especially against some of the better teams in the Big Ten that they're going to compete with. When I look at UCLA, I think that's where maybe things kind of go in a little bit of a different direction for who the Bruins could have as permanent rivals going in. Michigan, you got 2 different types of blue and gold kind of going up against each other. I think UCLA and Michigan could maybe be something, but do you want to welcome the Bruins that way? With the tough game there. Maybe Nebraska for UCLA. I think they played sometime in the 90s maybe, had a home and home or something. You try to make these connections. You try to say, well, your colors are the same. Well, this is, you try your best. I think those things are just going to form over time with UCLA. Where are they going to compete? Who are they going to compete with? I think if they go with this flex protected model, they might keep things fairly open-ended for USC and UCLA and let the rivalries form naturally. I think when we went to 12 teams, I did think they had outside of the division leaders and legends protect one protected rival from the other division or something like that. I forgot. And they tried to get Penn State, Nebraska. And it seems like, yeah, that might be a rivalry that might bud, but it never stuck. It never stuck. So you got to let these things happen naturally. Rivalries just sometimes form out of necessity. They form out of competition. You just got to let things happen naturally sometimes. Don't force it. Don't force it. There's a life lesson for you. Gary chiming in. Do you think the Big Ten should spread out the rivalry games? Michigan, Ohio State week. Oh, I see what you're saying. Instead of having all the rivalry games on the last week of the season. All right. Here comes the traditional college football fan out in me. Maybe the old guy on the porch that's yelling, "Don't change my college football." There's something about the buildup. There's something about playing your most hated rivalry at the end of the season. There's something about letting 11 games pass by and you whether there's stuff on the line or whether you're both 3-9 or 3-8. There's something about playing your arch nemesis on the last game of the season. There's something about that. I see the allure of maybe playing, because USC and UCLA, I think, has been the second to last game of the season. So that might stay that game, and then maybe USC and UCLA will play somebody else the last week of the season as well. I understand what you're trying to do, trying to space things out, but the traditionalist college football fan in me wants to see you build all that time up and play all those games only to play your most hated rival at the end of the season. There's something about having all those rivalry games. There's something about Auburn, Alabama, Michigan, Ohio State, Iowa, Nebraska, and the list goes on and on about all these other rivalries. Now Texas and Texas A&M, things like that. Having those rivalries at the end of the season, I think there's something to be said about that, to keep that the way it is. So much changing in college football, I want to see rivalries at the end of the season. Thank you for the question, though. Sunshine Design wants to say UCLA, and wants, I think what he's saying is UCLA to play Michigan and Illinois, USC to play Michigan State and Penn State. USC versus Notre Dame, not yet, at least in terms of a Big Ten game, maybe down the road, we'll see. HD90 Dog checking in here tonight. I haven't heard anything more on the new AD finalizing TV deals. I don't see scheduling or expansion moving past where it is until that is finalized. So much stuff up in the air right now. I think we just all want this settled. As fans, I'm sitting here, and I guess now is a good time to talk about this. I'm sitting here in my chair. I love college football because of Saturdays, the band, crazy game-winning Hail Marys. I just love the college football game. 100 yards, ends, whatever. Conference realignment, AAU, research, academics, TV deal. It's not my number one interest. Let me just put it that way. But I understand. It's very interesting to follow. And I followed it for a long time. There's a YouTube channel out there, I think, called D1GGEST that breaks down this stuff really well. If you're interested in conference realignment and the history of it, that's a channel to check out. It's very interesting. All the way from like Division III, NAIA even, I think, all the way up to Division I and the SEC and the Big Ten, covers it and does a great job breaking down why things have happened throughout time in terms of conference realignment. But this is, I get this is an off-season topic. People want to bring this up. And when you have a daily news cycle and when there's so much demand, I think, for news out there, like you're seeing it right now with this Pac-12 and Big 12 war, what's going on? My sources are saying this, well, my sources are saying that. You, as the viewer, you as the content consumer have to decide what you trust. Who do you trust? Because right now in that war, there are two sides to the story. There are two sides to the story. And you got to decide yourself. It's just like watching news or whatever else. You got to decide who you trust. Who do you think is telling the truth? Who's been reliable in the past? I think a track record speaks for itself with those kinds of things. So when we talk about the future of the Big Ten and scheduling and the scheduling announcement, could we see something down the road? You got to rely as the content consumer. You got to rely on who you trust the most. And as in my chair right now, I'm in a lot of the same chairs as you guys are. Watching a lot of these people out there saying this, some are saying that, and you have to decide who you trust. I have people who I trust, who I think have the right sources and are telling the right information. And that's whose content I consume. You pay their dollars. Okay, you prop them up by watching their content. If you don't trust somebody, don't watch their content. That's all I'll say. That's what I'll say about that. Tim saying uptick in recruiting for multiple reasons there for USC. I'll tell you what, if USC gets it together, if the USC Trojans get it together, and they got it together, maybe I shouldn't say if, right? But they got it together. Like this year, they are that's going to be a fantastic football team over there at USC. It's going to be great to watch the Pac-12, I think. That's going to be a conference that I'm going to have my eye on as maybe one of the more entertaining conferences in college football this season. A lot of great quarterbacks out west over there in the Pac-12. But, man, once they get into the Big Ten, it's going to be a different ball game. It's going to be a different ball game for USC and the Big Ten. They're going to have to be ready for Southern Cal. When USC has the coach, they've got the support, and they got the players, USC is one of the best programs in the country. We've seen it. We saw it with Pete Carroll, where USC was on top of the freaking world, and no one could touch them. No one could touch them. Okay? We've seen it with USC. Will it happen in the Big Ten? You got Ohio State up there. You got Michigan up there. You got Penn State up there. I'm very curious to see how the Trojans are going to compete. But right now, in the recruiting world, is going just fine. Landon Felix checking in just a random thought, but could you see the Big Ten making USC and UCLA an annual game for Nebraska to ensure one less trip to the East for both of the LA teams? I'd be very interesting to see what each, right now USC is without an athletic director, UCLA's athletic director. That's a very interesting quirk as well in the scheduling thing with the recent resignation of Mike Bone. Where's the voice in the room with USC? So that's another interesting, I'm sure they've got somebody in there, obviously, but just a very interesting little quirk, I think, in all of this. So we'll get to that. Yeah, I mean, a little bit closer travel, I think, couldn't hurt for USC and UCLA playing Nebraska. Do these athletic directors out west in Los Angeles, do they want to play a coast-to-coast schedule on the football side of things? I think that's something. If they want to play games on the East Coast, if they want to play, Penn State, do they want to play a nationwide schedule? If that's what they want to do, then maybe it doesn't matter if they play on the East Coast. I think they're going to be very strategic as to how exactly they put their schedule together. What recruiting markers? Where do they want to play? I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on for the USC Trojans. Crab Cakes and Football, very much appreciate you giving me the inspiration to talk about Maryland in segment 2 of today's show. We haven't even talked to segment 1. Well, we haven't talked about segment 1, so we're off to a good start here tonight. Thanks, everybody, for being around. Must play Penn State, according to Maryland. I said that before. There is a history. It's a one-sided history in favor of the Nittany Lions. Maryland is starting to figure out the big three, kinda. Going to talk about that in segment 2, so stick around. Crab Cakes and Football. Tony, Landon, I think Nebraska will get one of the LA schools right now. I'd probably side over to UCLA because I think USC is going to maybe get some other bigger games. Maybe Nebraska will be a bigger game down the road. Husker fans, don't get on me. Don't get on me too much. I think it might be a bigger game down the road, but as of right now, I could see USC having games with the Ohio States, Penn States, Michigan States, maybe stuff like that. Tyler O'Connor foreshadowing what's to come in segment 1 of the show. You know, like there's a week 0 in college football. This is like segment 0 right now. Nebraska at Colorado's first home game will be wild. I'm going to get to the biggest non-conference games involving Big Ten teams. That will probably be coming up pretty shortly, but right now the comments are hot, so we're going to keep on going. Going to keep on going. Tony, Penn State has played Maryland more than any other school. I think they should play every year. Yeah, that was maybe a victim of Twitter running out of characters there, leaving off the Penn State Maryland game. But I understand how you could see that game. It all depends on Maryland. Who does Maryland want to play every year? You got to think there's discussions in the room. There's lobbying been going back and forth on who each team wants to play. Who each team wants to play. I think that's a lot of this. That's a lot of what's going on here. Badger and Bournemouth fan, does anybody else think Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, USC will be the only Big Ten teams to be in the championship game and playoffs starting in 2024? I'm starting to think that. You know, I've talked about tiers in the Big Ten. I think starting in 2024, USC is going to be in that tier 1. I'm very curious to see how scheduling goes, because if Penn State has USC, Michigan, and Ohio State, that's 3 losses off the bat. I doubt that'll happen where you have the tier 1 teams playing the other 3 in a given schedule. I'm pretty sure they're going to space it out more than that. But I think scheduling is going to have a lot, because you could see teams rise up. Maybe Maryland plays one of those teams. Maybe Maryland only plays Penn State, and then maybe one year they don't have Ohio State, they don't have Michigan, they don't have USC. All of a sudden, they could go 10-2. And now Maryland looks pretty good. I think there's going to be more ebbs and flows with Big Ten teams now without the divisions, especially without that stacked East division, right? Those teams, the Michigan States that were buried, even though they came in and had a good 2021. Maryland, Indiana, Rutgers maybe could rise up a little bit. You might see Rutgers make a couple of consecutive bowl games. You might see that. There's going to be a little bit more ebbs and flows, I think, in all of this. When we talk about rivalries, Tim is talking from a USC perspective again. I really see a huge rivalry with Ohio State. I think we're both freight trains headed right at each other full steam, and there is some history of a home-and-home series, as I said, in the mid-2000s. Rose Bowls. That's where USC has the advantage in terms of scheduling, in terms of things that have already happened. USC and Michigan have played high-stakes Rose Bowl. Ohio State, USC, I believe that I can't pinpoint the year, but they've played in a Rose Bowl. They've played in high-stakes non-conference games as well. There's some, not a ton, but there's some history built in. And, of course, these teams are going to form a rivalry. I like the elimination of divisions, because now these last couple of games are going to mean that much more in that Big Ten championship game. Boy, that Big Ten championship game is going to mean 8,000 times more right there. So very excited about that. There it is. Tim coming in 08 and 09. 08 and 09. Let's see if my USC knowledge, let me pull from the depth of my brain. 08, Mark Sanchez. 09, John David Booty. That might not be correct, but that's right off the top. I know Mark Sanchez was ish in that time. I can't remember if John David Booty was before. Was he before Sanchez? Who would have been after? I can't remember. USC won them both. That's what matters, of course, to the Trojan backers out there. Yeah. Yeah, you got the Calabrasca connection that they've talked about before. Like, you look at the couple of maybe the most impactful Nebraska quarterbacks over the last decade or so, both have had the last name Martinez, right? Taylor and Adrian both came out of California, both came out of that Calabrasca connection. I believe Taylor Martinez was out of Corona. I can't remember where Adrian Martinez was out of California. So there has been a connection. And now with those teams coming into the Big Ten, maybe Nebraska recruiting, that Calabrasca connection is going to take a little bit of a boost as well. We talk about Tim coming out with the USC history, right? We got this USC history lesson going right now. 06-07, home and home with the Huskers. I thought it was later than that, but maybe not. USC won both of those games. Boy, USC doing good against the Big Ten here. But, man, great fans that game out to the Coliseum every time. Man, I went to Nebraska's very first game in the Big Ten Conference. It was in Madison, Wisconsin in 2010, 2011. I can't remember the exact year. College game day was there. Man, did Nebraska fans travel. They travel better than any fan base in the country. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. More comments. Getting a really good comments here tonight. What channel is the Pac-12 on? Right now they're on no channel. Well, I should say right now they're on ESPN and Fox. But right now, maybe this is a CW. Who knows where they're going to end up. Apple TV Plus. They could benefit. An Apple TV Plus deal where maybe they've got like classic content and stuff. That could maybe work. A distribution deal with Apple. But it was not announced at is what they call it? Worldwide Developers Conference, WWDC. So I haven't seen anything yet in terms of that. Joey wants to see USC go through the Big Ten, and nothing like playing in the Pac-12. Even though the Pac-12 is going to be pretty deep this year, a lot of good quarterbacks. The Big Ten's a different ball game. I said before, USC might have to adjust a little bit. Are they going to have to adjust their style later in the season? We'll see about that. We'll see. All good stuff here tonight. Mark Murphy. Not that Mark Murphy for you Packer fans out there. I assume so. Do you think Florida State is coming to the Big Ten? Not for a while. Unless the Magnificent Seven have some really good lawyers and are able to get out of that deal with the ACC. I just don't see it happening. I've told people it's really hard to kill a conference. It's really hard. Like over the past 20 or 30 years, I believe the only conference that has really died, at least a major conference, was the Southwest Conference. And that's because everybody was playing players under the table. And it was like every team except for like Rice and Arkansas, I believe, was on probation at some time in the Southwest Conference. And they all went to greener pastures. The Big East, what about the Big East? Well, they're still a conference, still a basketball and everything else conference. So it is very difficult to kill a conference. Conferences are stubborn. So it is hard. The Pac-12, will they evolve into something else? Maybe. ACC? Maybe. We'll see what happens. Should be very interesting to see exactly how things go here. Mark Murphy, here we go. I think Florida State would rather go to the Big Ten. They are building a $100 million medical facility to get AAU status. Didn't get it this time around. I think Miami, I said it in a video last Sunday, or this Sunday, whatever you want to call it. I love Miami right now with the AAU status. South Florida, Miami recruiting. Miami seems to be like if nobody had a contract, if nobody had a deal, Miami, and maybe Florida State, but Miami is my number one. Miami's my number one option because of what they bring to the table. They're a recognizable brand. If you got the right people, kind of like USC, if you got the right head coach, you got the right people in place, Miami can be a good football team. It happened with Mark Richt. They had a good season. Went 10-2 in the regular season. I believe that was 2016, where they lost to Wisconsin. There you go, in the Orange Bowl. That season. That was a turnover chain year. I believe it was the turnover chain year over there. So I think Miami would be the top if there were no contracts out there. I'd have to really think about it some more. But I touched on that before. Tim Prangley active in the chat today. Very much thank you for the support. Thank you for the super chat. FSU, Miami, Washington, Oregon, Cal, Stanford, Notre Dame. Who would be your four? So if I'm tasked with getting to 20 and boom, wall stops, throw it up. 20 is as far as we're going to go. Say, Tony Petiti knocks on my door and says, Ted, I need your help. We need to get to 20 teams. We need 4 more. Who are you picking? If that's what you're asking me to do, and that's my list, Tony Petiti says, here's my list, pick 4. So you got 6, pick 4. 2 aren't making it. Who's making it? All right, let's pick them in order. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim, for the discussion point. Notre Dame's first. Miami's second. Florida State's third. And then that's where things get tough. Stanford fourth. They have a connection with Notre Dame. They have a rivalry series with Notre Dame. I don't think you need more than one school in the Bay Area. I understand what Washington brings to the table. Good Seattle market, really good research institution. I think Stanford is just a notch above academically. The Bay Area, Stanford and Washington are very close. But those are the 4 that I would take to get to 20. Thank you very much for the support. Thank you much for the super chat. Thank you very much. Some very good discussion. We haven't even gotten to segment 1. That's how crazy this is right now. That's how crazy this is. All right. Let's get into some more stuff. Just saw a comment. Here we go. Okay, Badger and Bournemouth Fund not buying into what I'm selling. That's okay. We're here to discuss. Any team is going to have to finish above the top 2 to get into the playoff. I just don't see it. It depends on scheduling for me. I think that's where I'm at. I think it depends on scheduling. If USC gets 2 out of those 3, right, in that year, and then they fall to UCLA and they trip up, they're all of a sudden a 9-3 team, and all of a sudden you could see Iowa or Wisconsin get to 10-2. I need to see the scheduling. I just think the scheduling is going to have some ebbs and flows as well. It's going to be very difficult. I want to make this known. It's going to be very difficult to get into that top 2, folks. The top 4 even. Get into that top tier with USC, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. It's going to be really tough. But I want to see the scheduling. I think it's going to have ebbs and flows. I think that's what's going to happen. And what's the effect of having USC and UCLA? What's the effect of having Los Angeles? What's the effect of having that recruiting market? I think we're not going to find that out until maybe 2026, 2027, until a recruiting cycle has come and gone. Tyler O'Connor, Matt Rule doing what made Nebraska great? Recruiting Texas, right? He's got the Texas connection, which stopped when Nebraska joined the Big Ten. That's the thing. They had, with the Big 12, they had a big-time Texas recruiting connection. Now in the Big Ten, they've kind of taken away that pipeline. Can Matt Rule get back in there? I think that's something that could affect a lot of the success. Do they need to get back in there? Sure, it would be nice. Texas is great for recruiting. If Nebraska can get back in there, great. But I think there's other areas of the country. Nebraska has now kind of turned into more of a a team that needs to recruit a little bit more national because they don't have the big-time Texas connection. And the Big Ten really is turning national as a whole as well. Maybe California, the Calabrasca connection. We talked about that before as well. Very good discussion points here tonight, folks. Very good discussion. 8:52 p.m. here in the Central Time Zone. We haven't even gotten to segment 1. That's how you know you're doing good. That's how you know things are flowing, baby. All right, Tim Tim Prangley is our stats and info tonight as it pertains to USC. 09, Matt Barkley. So John David Booty must have been before. True freshman, win at the shoe. 08 was Sanchez. JDB was the most underrated USC quarterback since ever. Yeah, so that would have been Leinart, Booty, Sanchez, Barkley, maybe? I'm learning a lot about USC football tonight. Very much appreciate that. They need 8 teams to break the grant of rights out there, and 8 could be Notre Dame. 8 could be Notre Dame. Watch out. The year 2025 is a very key year. It's a very key year in the Big Ten Conference because that's when Notre Dame's NBC deal comes up. And that's very interesting timing because the Big Ten is going to have a couple of years under the belt of Big Ten Saturday night. How is it going to compare to this Notre Dame football? If Notre Dame is like saying, well, Big Ten Saturday night is kind of overshadowing us a little bit. NBC doesn't want to pay 50 to 75 million like it's being rumored. That's what Notre Dame wants. Then maybe that 8th vote could come pretty quick. Dallas Schwartz coming in. By the way, he was the first comment here today. I can't wait for USC's move to the Big Ten. I love the Heartland. I love the Heart. Man, when's the last time you saw a USC fan saying they love the Heartland? We'll see. We'll see how you feel when you play a November game in Minneapolis. Sadly, not all the USC fans are hip to the farm. Plus, understand we're not all like those that look down at the Heartland as well. Play a couple of games late in the season. And we'll see how you feel after that. I love the Heartland. I live in the Heartland all my life. I love the seasons. Tony starting Miami, Florida State, Notre Dame. That's where he's going to start. Immaculate to get to 20. Notre Dame, Miami. He goes Oregon and Washington as well to get there. Stanford, I know about Stanford and their stadium. I know. I'm going Bay Area. I'm going market. I'm going academics. That's what the Big Ten likes. They want to be, right, with no Pac-12 and ACC. Somebody's got to hold the academic flag as a conference, and it's got to be the Big Ten. It's got to be the Big Ten. Tony chiming in. How about North Carolina? North Carolina wasn't on the list that I was provided. UNC. I think that UNC is they know their value. The SEC is going to try to get into North Carolina. They're going to try to get into Virginia. North Carolina is going to be fought over. And they are going to sit back and say, show me the money. Show me the money, Jerry. That's what they're going to be saying. They're going to be quoting that movie. They're going to be quoting Jerry Maguire, and they're going to love being fought over by the Big Ten and the SEC. D.A. Wolf chiming in. Notre Dame, FSU, then maybe Oregon and Washington. No Miami here for D.A. Wolf. Mark Murphy once again. Florida State on the ACC marketed TV up until 2021. Don't quote me on that, though. You don't worry. I won't. Tony chiming in. Nebraska needs to beat Colorado. We're going to get to that in segment 1. We're still in segment 0, and an hour of this show has gone by. I love it. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. Grateful Trojan checking in November, the Midwest, 45 degrees at worst. Sometimes it's very unpredictable here in the Midwest. Here in Minnesota, Minnesota played Iowa. Second to last week, or no, it would be the second week of November, I think it was, last season. Here in Minnesota, single digits for that game. Think the Big Ten's going to be pretty nice on USC into maybe some of these travel. They're going to ease them in a little bit. But outside of Minnesota and maybe Wisconsin, I lived in Wisconsin. I lived an hour north of Madison. And I want to say this. It's very unpredictable. You could get a 5-degree day in November, and I think you could get a 45-degree day here, like the Grateful Trojan is saying. It's unpredictable. That's why we love the Midwest. And we're all going to learn that pretty soon. That's why I love the Midwest. It's unpredictable in the fall. It's great falls here. So we'll see. Now, remember, USC and UCLA likely to be the last game of the season. So the third Saturday in November is the latest that they would travel to somewhere. And that could be a home game as well for USC and UCLA. So then it goes to the second Saturday in November, which I talked about before. It depends where you go. You know, when you look, I can speak from experience living in Wisconsin. I lived in Minnesota, and I lived in North Dakota. Okay? Fargo, North Dakota, even though geographically it might not be terribly far away from Madison, weather's very different. My parents live an hour north of Madison, and it gets cold, a lot colder, 4 hours, 5 hours north up here in the Twin Cities than it does down there. Like, you might not think it does, but the weather is a little bit different. We've talked about that. We're going to continue to talk about that until we really find out what happens with some of these West Coast schools. We'll see what happens. And now we're talking about weather. Some days grateful. Also seen temps in the teens. Back and forth. Out east, you see that Penn State and Michigan State game has kind of been snowstorms, the last couple of years? Snowstorms the last couple of years out there. Maybe that's why they're moving it indoors to Ford Field. A couple of USF fans. We got Tim and the Grateful Trojan in here tonight. Both loving the Midwest. Saginaw, Michigan, born and raised. Michigan is a beautiful state. Badger and Bournemouth fan went to the 400-yard rushing game for Melvin Gordon. It was 25 and snowing in week 10. So just watch out. We're going to love teams from the Midwest going to sunny Southern California and not having to worry about, are we going to be able to throw a 10-yard out through this wind? Are we going to be able to do this? Are we going to be able to do that? You just kind of count down. It's just like There was a week last week. Remember when Ohio State played at Northwestern? It was Iowa and Purdue, where it was the monsoon between Maryland and Wisconsin. Like the weather in the Midwest, it's not cold. It's sometimes wind. It's sometimes sideways rain. It's just all these other weather conditions that you need to worry about. Lake effect, snowstorms. 2010 on a sheet of ice between the Hawkeyes and the Gophers. Hawkeyes and the Gophers. John, I want to give a quick shout out to you because you gave me my idea on YouTube, the community post this week about our first segment, which we're going to get into here in a couple of minutes. Anyone else to see Alabama coming to Madison? That's coming up in that's coming up in a little bit. Tim, not excited to go to Camp Randall in late November. It should be. If you go to Minneapolis in late November, Madison is, like I said, these can be hit or miss a little bit, but Minneapolis, it's going to be chilly. I'll also say this. It's a good thing that North Dakota State up in Fargo is not an option for Big Ten expansion, even though they have an indoor stadium, so that maybe throws it out the window. But, man, it is cold. It is cold. I was a part of the production team for ESPN Plus, North Dakota State, Montana, second round of the playoffs. It was the same Saturday as the Big Ten championship game. And the North Dakota, no question in Fargo, it gets cold, but it is flat as a pancake in the plains of North Dakota, and the wind hits you in the face. I worked there for a year and a half, and that is by far the worst winter I've been a part of over there in North Dakota. All right, guys. All right. Good stuff here tonight. Some great discussion. We need to get into segment 1 because if we keep on talking, and I'm going to get to some more comments later, if we keep on talking, we're going to be on segment 0 forever. So let's get to segment 1. Let's shift the focus from scheduling, from weather, to let's focus on what's going to happen on the football field early in the season. Let's talk about non-conference games involving Big Ten teams, because there are a good amount of games within the Big Ten Conference teams that stand out, that could maybe affect the national perception of the Big Ten going forward. Let's go through it. Didn't have time to quite make a graphic or anything on this, so I'm just going to go through them in chronological order. The biggest one is we're probably going to save the best for last, but I'm going to start with week number 2. Week number 2, in terms of non-conference games, we start things off with an absolutely gigantic matchup. One of the most highly anticipated matchups of the non-conference schedule, Nebraska at Colorado. I cannot wait for this. Saturday, September 9th, 12 o'clock Eastern on Fox, which means what? 10 o'clock a.m. kickoff locally in Boulder, Colorado. Boy, those Coloradans, they're going to need to wake up early. Get that hike in early, baby. Get that mountain hike in early. You got to get to Folsom Field for a 10 a.m. local kickoff. A 10 a.m. local kickoff between Nebraska and Colorado. You know the Big Red Nation is going to show up. You know, even though the athletic director said this at a press conference, even though things have been happening, things have been said, you know the Big Red Nation is going to show up in Boulder, Colorado. Here's why this game is such a big deal. And here's why this game is a little bit unpredictable, in my opinion. Both of these teams start their season on the road against good teams. Nebraska, Thursday night at Minnesota. Right now, I look at that game as being a Minnesota victory. I might get to that a little bit later on in the show. Colorado is at a team that played in the national championship game last year at TCU. Both of those games, right? Thursday night, Nebraska and Minnesota. Big noon for Colorado and TCU. They're both going to be in the spotlight. They're both going to have eyeballs on them. And then you follow it up with a big noon game between Nebraska and Colorado. I think when we look at Nebraska and Colorado right now, I see a game where we don't really, there's a lot of, especially on the Colorado side of things, and some on the Nebraska side of things as well, you see a lot of new faces and new places. You see a lot of taking advantage of the transfer portal. You see a shift over in staffs for the Cornhuskers and the Buffaloes. I think that's something to kind of keep in mind as well. Like right now, we don't know what we're going to get out of Colorado. When you bring in 50 some odd transfers, we've seen nothing like that, folks. We've seen 15 guys, 20 guys, 25 guys, something like that. And we thought that was big time turnover, but Coach Prime and Deion Sanders has just flipped it on its head. He has completely flipped a 1-11 roster. Right? I'm bringing my luggage with me. That's what Deion Sanders said to his team, and maybe a lot of the guys in that meeting room when he said that are now gone and out of Boulder, Colorado. So when I look at this game and I look at the rosters for the respective teams, I think this is a toss-up. I just don't know what to expect. We're going to know a lot more after week number 1 when Colorado plays TCU, when Nebraska plays Minnesota. We're going to know a lot more about these teams at that time. But as I'm looking at it here on the 7th of June, 2023, it's very difficult, especially on the Colorado side of things. But I will give you this in terms of X's and O's. Travis Hunter, one of the most talented defensive backs, maybe one of the most talented players in the country. You look at him, and then you look at the Nebraska passing game, right? You've got Jeff Sims coming in, transfer quarterback. Some people putting some dark horse Heisman odds on his name. I don't know if we don't need to go there yet quite with Jeff Sims. But this is a receiving core for Nebraska I think could be pretty balanced. You look at Marcus Washington is in there, Isaiah Garcia-Castaneda, Xavier Betts, Billy Kemp looked really good in the spring game, Josh Fleeks. They've got a balanced, good receiving core. I didn't even mention the tight ends, Thomas Fedoni, Berkshire, Gilbert. You look at the tight ends and stuff. I think this is going to be, they're going to have a lot of decent to maybe good players in this Nebraska, at least skilled players for the Huskers. So maybe Travis Hunter locking down like a Trey Palmer last year. I don't know if that's going to be as prevalent for Nebraska. But maybe, so there's going to be more of a plethora of weapons for the Huskers to possibly throw to. And we don't know what this Nebraska offense is going to look like. Do they want to run the ball? Yes, they want to run the ball. Is their offensive line improved? Probably. Quarterback play improved? It remains to be seen if Jeff Sims is better than Casey Thompson. Shedeur Sanders has not played an FBS game. We don't know what we're going to see between Colorado and Nebraska. There's so much uncertainty right now, but the one thing that is for certain is this is going to be a huge game, a hyped up game. When you look at it from a television perspective, you know what Fox is rooting for. Fox is rooting for Nebraska to beat Minnesota and Colorado to beat TCU. Now, I know it's only one game, right? It's 1-0 versus 1-0, but I believe that is going to help this game tremendously really build on the hype. And Fox is really hyping up this game. They're already hyping up this game right now between Nebraska and Colorado. It would not surprise me. No surprise at all. If both teams, if a team, one of these two teams, Nebraska and Colorado, starts 2-0, they can start 1-1, they can start 0-2. None of that would surprise me. None of that. Nebraska or Colorado could have those three records by the time two games are in the books. It's so unpredictable right now. But I think that maybe adds to the intrigue of a little bit from a fan perspective, maybe from a TV perspective. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if Jeff Sims is going to come out and he's going to light it up. We don't know if Shedeur Sanders is going to adjust to the FBS game. We don't know. And I think that's what makes this very intriguing. So Nebraska and Colorado. Week 2's got two more games that I want to touch on. This one happens every year. Iowa at Iowa State. Folks, Iowa opens the season against Utah State. It's very simple. The formula is very simple at Kinnick against the Aggies. Light them up. Build confidence on the offensive side of the ball. Build it up. Because the worst thing that could happen for the Iowa Hawkeyes coming out of the gate is a 20-13 win with a defensive touchdown against Utah State. Will that happen? No, I don't think it'll happen. But you never know. We don't know what's going to happen with Brian Ferentz. Okay, we don't know what's going to happen over there. But they need to come out and set the tone, gain confidence early against Utah State. That's what needs to happen, I think, for the Iowa Hawkeyes. It needs to happen. And then you go into this game against Iowa State. You look at Iowa State, and they return their quarterback from last year. Hunter Deckers is back. They return their top rusher. They lose Xavier Hutchinson, who is their top receiver, very good receiver. But they bring back Jalen Noel and Dimitri Stanley, two of their top three receivers. So the cupboard isn't necessarily completely bare for the Cyclones. Okay, I think that's one thing that we need to keep in mind. And Iowa's going on the road to Iowa State this season. Iowa State also returns their top rusher, Jarrell Brock, as well. This is a chance. This game against Iowa, or against Iowa State for Iowa, is a chance for the Hawkeyes to prove that they are not only a good football team, but they are a good offense. I don't know what Iowa State's defense is going to look like, but this is a prove-it game for the Hawkeyes. If they come out and they lose 10-17, here we go again. There's going to be questions in Brian Ferentz's office. So those first two games, I want to see the Iowa Hawkeyes come out, and I want to prove it. Prove it against your rival. Prove it against the Power 5 team that you can maybe contend for a Big Ten West title. You can contend for a Big Ten championship as well. Okay? So that Iowa State, that's a Saturday, September 9th, 3:30 Eastern on Fox. That's going to be fun to see that one. Last one I want to mention here in week number 2, Illinois and Kansas. This is kind of a sneaky one. This is a little bit of a sneaky one between the Illini and the Jayhawks. Jalen Daniels was the heartthrob. Jalen Daniels was the darling of the first half of the college football season last year, and he's coming back this year off of an injury. Off of an injury right now against the Illini. No time or network announced for this game quite yet. So his talent, Jalen Daniels' talent, especially pushing the ball down the field, maybe could cause some issues for that Illinois defense, right? Illinois losing Sidney Brown, losing Devin Witherspoon on the back end of that defense. I think where Kansas could possibly take advantage of this is through the air. Now I'll kind of combat you a little bit because Kansas brings back a lot on their offense. They bring it back their leading rusher in Devin Neal, 1,090 yards and 9 touchdowns. They bring back some good receivers from their offense as well. Their defense was atrocious, though. 124th in the country. Here are some startling numbers about the Kansas defense. Get ready. Buckle in, folks. If you wanted Kansas in the Big Ten, you might not think that after this. And, well, I think that ship has long sailed. I'll definitely say that. Kansas last year, 9 times gave up 30-plus points in a game. 9 times in a 12-game season. 6 times they gave up 40-plus points. I think they got a few transfers on their team, but Kansas's defense, this is an opportunity for Illinois, right? We don't know where they're going to be from a running back standpoint. Reggie Love, Josh McCray, who's going to kind of take over the running game? What's the offensive line going to look like? We saw when Chase Brown wasn't in the bowl game that they kind of had a little bit difficult time running the football. So this is the time for Luke Altmaier to really burst onto the scene in a game at Kansas kind of early in the season. They've got good receivers, Isaiah Williams, Juice 2.0, Casey Washington, Pat Bryant I really liked last year as a young guy. What's the offense going to look like? They were so heavy on the run game. Now maybe they're going to be a little bit more in the pass game this year. I think that could still be a toss-up and could still be up in the air. But this is a kind of a sneaky game. Illinois opens the season against Toledo. They play Kansas. They could start with a good amount of momentum and could start on a roll. If they want to prove last year was not a fluke, beating Kansas would be a good way to do that. And for Kansas to maybe prove that the first half of the season wasn't a fluke, hey, they could beat Illinois. They play at Kansas, and I've been to that stadium. On my trip out to Colorado a few summers ago. Came back, we stopped in Lawrence, saw the rules of basketball at Allen Fieldhouse, and we checked out that stadium. It's not good, folks. It's not good. It is. They need an upgrade at the stadium. I just want to say that. Toledo is a game that maybe people should watch out for as well. I know I kind of saw that in the comments as well earlier in the week. It said, could be a spicy matchup with the Toledo Rockets as well. So maybe a little bit of a decent start, a little bit of strength of schedule could be pretty strong for Illinois to kind of start things off. So that's week number 2. Let's move on to week number 3, folks. Week number 3. We got 2 games in week number 3. Minnesota travels to North Carolina. All right? So I think a lot of the hype of this game really depends on what happens between Minnesota and Nebraska in week number 1. Right now, I'm going Gophers in week number 1. I think the Gophers in the early betting lines are the early favorites. That's where we're at with Minnesota. North Carolina. They have one of the very best quarterbacks in the country. You look outside of Caleb Williams, who's number 2 at the quarterback position, Heisman Trophy, all that type of stuff. Drake May's right up there. Now, I will say this. You lose your offensive coordinator, right? Phil Longo is now the offensive coordinator at Wisconsin. So there's something to be said about that. And all the success that Phil Longo has had, going back to Sam Howell as well at North Carolina, he's been a big part of their offensive success. So how does Drake May with their new offensive coordinator? Couldn't tell you who it is. Did not do that much research. I was working today. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. So the thing when I look at this might be the toughest test for the Minnesota defense, especially their secondary, all season long. But on paper, this might seem, well, you got a Heisman candidate at North Carolina. You look at Minnesota's maybe losing the best player that they've ever had in their history. Like, what? Like, of course, North Carolina's at home at Kenan Stadium. Of course, North Carolina's going to win, but slow your roll. Dive into a little bit. North Carolina losing some top receivers. North Carolina 108th in the country last season in defense. They gave up 30 points per game last year. Not a great defensive team. Kansas, North Carolina, great at basketball, maybe not great at defense on the football side of things. What happens if Nebraska wins week 1? And what happens if Minnesota wins week 1 over Nebraska, and then Minnesota beats North Carolina? What if Minnesota makes this a Big Ten game? I think that's the way Minnesota has to approach it. You're never going to fully stop Drake May. I don't think you're ever going to do that. But you got to contain him. You got to control time of possession. Ethan Kaliakmanis can't make mistakes. I think you got to probably run the football pretty well with guys like Sean Tyler and Zach Evans, maybe true freshman Darius Taylor, maybe Bryce Williams, guys like that. You need to run the football well. You need to make this a Big Ten game. You need to bring your lunch pail to work. You need to say, we're going to control you. We're going to run. We're going to run and we're going to run and we're going to run and we're going to keep the ball out of the hands of the Heisman candidate. We need to play PJ ball. We need to play PJ Fleck football. That's exactly what needs to happen with Minnesota against North Carolina. It would not surprise me to see Minnesota go on the road to North Carolina and win. I want to say that, and I think that would really boost up the Big Ten. I would love to see Minnesota go on the road to North Carolina and beat them on ESPN. ESPN. That's the emphasis on that one, because it's going to either be on ESPN or ESPN2. Give me on one of those two networks. That's this big one. If Minnesota, they could be undefeated, folks. I can't remember if it would be 4-0 or 5-0. They could be undefeated first Saturday in October against the Michigan Wolverines. And that, right now, has not been assigned a network. Hasn't been assigned a network, and it hasn't been assigned a time. Big Ten Saturday night, anybody? Big noon, not sure if there's a big noon there. Big noon, anybody? That could be one of the biggest games of that week. Now, Michigan's probably going to win. I mentioned before in a video that could be maybe an upset to watch. Minnesota, if they gain momentum, they're able to beat Nebraska on the road. They're able to beat North Carolina on the road. Everybody's talking, me included. Everybody's talking tough schedule. 6-6, 7-5. First year full-time starting quarterback, right? I know Ethan did half the year last year. People are talking about that, but we need to focus on Minnesota. All PJ Fleck does is win 8 games. That's all he does. And then 11 games back in 2019. But he is consistent. Is this going to be another 8-win season? 9-win season? Or is Minnesota going to get it together? Out of all the teams in the Big Ten West, I was maybe most impressed what Minnesota showed me in their spring game. Nebraska didn't look good. Wisconsin didn't look good. Iowa wasn't on television. Minnesota looked really good in their spring game, and they had 2 wide receiver weapons. The hyphenated guys are some of the best at their position. Chris Ottman-Bell and Brevin Spanford at tight end. This was an offense. The big question mark for me for Minnesota in this game specifically against North Carolina is their defense. Is their defense going to hang? Tyler Newb and Justin Wally back there. They brought in some transfers to really shore up some defense. What's it going to look like? It's a Joe Rossi defense, so it should be pretty good, but is pretty good enough to knock off a guy like Drake May in North Carolina? Oh, I want to talk about this one as well, because a lot of people, when the network assignments were kind of dropped for this one, everybody's like, Washington and Michigan State on Peacock? Really? Yes, we're going to see, and it's kind of a weird time. Was it 4 or 5 o'clock, something like that as well? Washington and Michigan State. This is a tough one, folks. I did the predictor today for Michigan State, and I know people have accused me in the past of hating on MSU, but man, I look at this game, I look at Michigan State. This one's tough, folks. This is tough. It's tough. You could see 3-9. You could see 4-8. Not saying you will. I'm saying you could. You could for Michigan State. You got a Heisman guy in Michael Penix back there. Remember when Iowa forced 3 or 4 turnovers and Michael Penix got hurt a couple of years ago, and now a couple of years later he transfers, and we're talking dark horse Heisman at Washington? It's crazy. It's crazy what has happened with Michael Penix's transformation. That's the beauty about the transfer portal. You got a talented kid. Sometimes things don't work out at a particular school. Go somewhere else that really fits your talent and fits your system. You see what Michael Penix can do. That's one of the positives, I think, of the transfer portal we've seen thus far. This is you look at Michigan State. I believe Michigan State is this might be one of the better front sevens that they've had under Mel Tucker. That is not, how do I say this? Not setting a high bar. Not setting a high bar, because Michigan State has been in the bottom tier of Big Ten defenses the last few seasons. Even when they won 11 games, their defense still wasn't very good, especially their pass defense. And if there is a weakness on this Michigan State defense, it's in the secondary. It's in the secondary. Okay. Good front seven. I look at Jacoby Windman, true freshman I forgot his name. Off the top of my head. Sorry about that. But they have some good. Cal Halliday's up there as well. Tamunsi Adelie is a transfer from Texas A&M. It's just Washington's a good team, folks. Washington's a really good team. Dark horse playoff. I don't think they'll get past a USC in the Pac-12 or someone else, but they're going to be right there. New Year's 6 maybe type of team for the Washington Huskies. Yeah, it's going to be tough. It's going to be very tough for Michigan State, even though they're at home. Like, home field advantage at Spartan Stadium should maybe not be taken too seriously as of right now, because look what happened last year. Look what happened when Minnesota came into Spartan Stadium and slapped them in the mouth. So if you want to talk about home field advantages, just maybe look back to that. But when you look at this game, like Michigan State, it's tough for them. You looking up and down their schedule, and look at the name of the channel, Big Ten Ted. I want to see Michigan State do well in a non-conference game. I really do. They'll probably win their first 2 games against Richmond and Central Michigan. They play Washington, but man, their next couple of games, I can't remember the order off the top of my head. I think you got to play Iowa. Iowa's in there. I don't see that happening right now. I forgot these other games off the top of my head, but they could be 2-3, and then it just spirals from there, man. It's just, look at the flag. Look at the flag. I always reference the flag, it seems. Look at the flag behind me. Who are they better than? Who's Michigan State better than right now? Better than Maryland? Nope. Better than Indiana? Yeah, maybe by a little bit. Indiana has brought in some transfers. I think they're going to be improved this season. They're better than Rutgers? Yeah, probably. Look at the West. Who are they better than? I don't want to be a Michigan State hater. I don't want that to be the label. But I'm just trying to look at the facts. You lose your quarterback. You lose your top playmaker on the perimeter. You're trotting Trey Mosley out there as your top wide receiver. I know you got Alante Brown for Nebraska, but I don't know how big of an addition that is. It's hard for me to say that Michigan State is going to compete in this football game. And you look at the rest of the Big Ten schedule, we might touch on that later in some season preview episodes. I don't know. They're going to be better in the front seven on defense. They have to hope that Jalen Berger and UConn transfer Nathan Carter have a really good tandem of the running game, but that's what they were expecting last year when Colorado transfer Jarek Broussard came in, and it didn't hit. Jalen Berger got better, I think, as the season went on late in the year, so they got to hope that tandem at running game. They got to hope Noah Kim or Caden Hauser, it looks like it's going to be Noah Kim, and East Lansing is going to be a good quarterback. We just don't know that information right now. We know what Washington looks like. We know Washington is a complete team. Kalen DeBoer, watch out for him. Watch out for him for maybe future coaching jobs. Maybe even in the Big Ten Conference. All right, last game that I'm really going to focus on. Then I've got some honorable mentions. You got to talk about it. Week 4. This is the big one. Ohio State at Notre Dame. 7:30 Eastern, September 23rd on NBC. Who, baby? This is a freaking doozy. This is going to be a fantastic football game. Let's take a look at the schedules prior to this game for both the Buckeyes and the Irish. I think that's the first thing that I really want to look at. Ohio State opens at Indiana. That's a CBS game in the mid-afternoon. Youngstown State, and then Western Kentucky. So they will likely be undefeated by a lot going into this game against Notre Dame. Notre Dame starts in Ireland week 0 against Navy. They play Tennessee State. They play at NC State and Central Michigan. That's some great scheduling there at Notre Dame. Both these teams will likely be undefeated. I think the toughest test for either of these teams maybe would be Notre Dame going to NC State. Maybe, but Notre Dame's going to get by because they're a good football team. Like, this is going to be a really good test for Ohio State and for Notre Dame, right? You've got 2 new quarterbacks in terms of Sam Hartman being his first year in South Bend, Indiana. I will say that. And then of course you got Kyle McCord likely is going to be the quarterback because of Devin Brown's injury in the spring there for Ohio State. But we're really going to find out. We're really going to find out where Ohio State is and where Notre Dame is in this football game. Are they both playoff teams? Look what happened a year ago. Notre Dame, even early in the season when Notre Dame experienced the majority of their struggles, Notre Dame gave Ohio State a fight. Nothing was easy for C.J. Stroud and the Buckeyes that night in Columbus. Nothing was easy. When you look at Notre Dame, you bring in Sam Hartman, of course. And Notre Dame as well has a good running back in Audric Estime as well. He was a tough runner in that game against Ohio State last season. I am very excited to see the matchup of maybe Audric Estime running against the front 7 of Ohio State. I believe Jim Knowles came out and said a week or so ago, we have the potential. We could be the best defense in the country. That defensive line, JT Tuimoloau, you look at Michael Hall Jr., look at Jack Sawyer. How about Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers at linebacker? Like, this is a good group. Ohio State has a really good front 7. I look, kind of like Michigan State, but obviously Ohio State's better. Where's the secondary going to be? I think that's maybe a little bit of a question. We might have those answers. I don't know of a lot of a downfield threat for Notre Dame. We know there's downfield threats for Ohio State. Can Marvin Harrison Jr. continually take the top off the defense? The big thing for me in this game is, can Notre Dame contain these Ohio State wide receivers? That's going to be, I'm going to sound like a broken record this season, because when you face Ohio State, you got to be able to cover. Because you can't blitz. Eventually, your corners are going to be out on an island. And they're going to have to cover the best, potentially the best player in the freaking country in Marvin Harrison Jr. They're going to have to cover a potential first-round draft pick in Emeka Ibuka. You look at Julian Fleming. You look at Xavier Johnson. How about true freshman Carnell Tate? In this game? Kyle McCord. He's a young kid. He's coming in. I mentioned the schedule for Ohio State that's leading up to this game against Notre Dame. But you got to look at this, and for Notre Dame going on the road to South Bend, they got to rattle Kyle McCord. You got to hope he doesn't have a ton of composure. Maybe he gets rattled with some early pass rush combinations from this Notre Dame team. But Ohio State, I hate to call games, especially in September, must-wins. But if Ohio State falls in this game, they still got to play Penn State. They still got to play Michigan. They still got to play a tricky game against Wisconsin on the road in the middle of the year. I don't want to say they lose this game and they're out of the playoff, but remember, they have to go to Ann Arbor, Michigan. I think the best case for them is to go undefeated going into that Michigan game, and we'll see what happens in terms of playoff positioning is. But this is going to be an absolute banger of a game between Notre Dame and Ohio State. I'm so excited to possibly see this game. How good is Kyle McCord? We're going to find that out in this football game. All right, let's just get to some honorable mentions here. Just going to mention these really, really quick. West Virginia at Penn State. A lot of people down on West Virginia. So Penn State, Drew Allar, light them up. Light them up at home on Big Ten Saturday night. Okay, you got to start off with a bang. Wisconsin at Washington State. This is tricky. Cougars were able to beat Wisconsin in Madison last season, right? Badgers looking for revenge. Playing Washington State at night on ABC early in the season could be a little bit tricky going to the Palouse out there in Pullman early in the season. I think Wisconsin is better. I think Wisconsin will get it done, but just watch out for these tricky early season matchups, especially with a new coaching staff as well. How about Louisville and Indiana at a neutral site in Indianapolis? If Indiana wants to get back to a bowl game, this almost seems like a must-win for them. Louisville has brought in one of the best transfer classes in the country. Jeff Brom has done a great job. This is at a neutral site in Indianapolis. So this should be an intriguing game on Big Ten Network as well. All right, let's get to some comments. Because I saw a lot of comments coming in. So I got to scroll back quite a ways here. Scroll back. Tony chiming in. Lots of questions about Wisconsin and Nebraska going into the season. I hope they have some growing pains. We've got some fanhood maybe coming out a little bit. I think both will have growing pains in some areas. Wisconsin maybe on defense. Nebraska maybe in a lot of places. So we'll see. We'll see what happens is there. I like Billy Kemp. Billy Kemp is a receiver for Nebraska. That looked really good. He looked very, very good in the spring game. I love what Billy Kemp brought to that. I think there's good talent. Can Jeff Sims get them the football? What's the offense going to look like under Marcus Satterfield? I think is going to. As it pertains to Nebraska and Colorado, Grateful Trojans saying Nebraska, going to smoke them. Going to put them on the smoker, according to Grateful Trojan. Right now, I got Nebraska losing to Minnesota, coming back and beating Colorado over there. Erica Goldberg, thank you for the super chat. Hearing you got that Iowa gambling situation over there. Maybe the Iowa quarterback, due to gambling issues, did not hear that. But that's something that we might find out more information here later on. But once again, so thank you for supporting the channel. And thank you for the super chat. Joey chiming in with McNamara, quarterback for Iowa. They'll be one of the best teams in the West. They are right there, folks. They have the defense once again. They've made the improvements on offense at quarterback with Cade McNamara, a guy that's won a Big Ten title, and an offense that's ish kind of what they want to do, like what they did at Michigan, even though the offensive line is not nearly as good as he had at Michigan. Caleb Brown, of course, the transfer from Ohio State, could be one of the breakthrough players if they utilize him correctly. The big thing for Iowa, how much do you trust Brian Ferentz? You've got Eric Hall, Luke Lachey. You've got guys out there that can make plays. There's no doubt about it. You've got guys out there that can make some plays. Do you trust Brian to put him in the right spots to do that? Do you trust Brian to call the right plays in the right situations to make that happen? I'm going to wait for that. I'm going to wait and see. Grateful Trojan, once again, coming in with his thoughts. Illinois might take a step back this year, but overall they're headed in the right direction. Last year they went 8-4 in the regular season. So that's a barometer in terms of stepping back. A lot of toss-ups. Once again, reference the flag. Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, Wisconsin, maybe Purdue. They got to play Purdue on the road this season. Illinois does. So a lot of toss-up games for the Illini. I like Illinois. They've got some nasty boys up front in the front seven of that, right? Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph on the defensive line. Gabe Jacobs and Tariq Barnes at linebacker. They've got one of the best front sevens in the conference. What's going to happen on offense with no Chase Brown? Right? It's kind of like that Minnesota dilemma a little bit. Tony chiming in once again. I think Nebraska will make a bowl game this year, but there is usually some growing pains for first-year head coaches. USC and Oregon from last year might disagree. There will be, and look, 6-6 is completely fine, Husker fans. You went 3-9 and 4-8 the last two seasons. Like, getting to a bowl game, I think, is progress in year number one for Matt Rule. You get that extra bowl practice, which coaches have said in the past that is big to further developing your football team. Nebraska getting to a bowl, I got them somewhere floating around 6-6. A lot of toss-up games for Nebraska this season. A lot of toss-up games. Illini for Life, don't sleep on Toledo. Yep, heard about that. Heard that should be something we should all keep an eye on. So Illinois starting with Toledo at home and at Kansas. So we'll find out early about Illinois. Dallas Schwartz, I always look forward to the Cy-Hawk game. If Coach Campbell doesn't win at least 8 this year, he may be sacked. You remember when Matt Campbell was one of the hottest commodities, right? When they had Brock Purdy and Breece Hall. His stock has kind of gone down a little bit, hasn't it? McNamara should help the defense. Yeah, that was the thing about last year. There was so much pressure put on that defense because their offense was so putrid. It's like the Ohio State game was a perfect example where they're forcing turnovers. They're hanging around against Ohio State on the road. And then the dam finally broke. I used that term a few times last season. The dam finally broke. It's just, we can't do this. We're out there all the time. We need some help. We need a rest. Hopefully that'll happen this year. Minnesota needs to eat the clock in their matchup against North Carolina. They needed to make it a Big Ten game. North Carolina wants to make it. They want to go up and down. They want a fast break, right? Like the Tar Heels basketball team. Tony's saying, yeah, Drake May, if you could just opt out after week 1, that'd be outstanding. That'd be outstanding. We'll see if that happens, though. Talking about Washington, Michigan State. Washington is going to light them up, according to the Grateful Trojan. It's tough for me, even though I see improvement on the front seven, even though I see some good returning players on the front seven. It's tough for me to imagine Washington not winning by 10 to 15, 17 points or whatever. It's tough for me to imagine that. John thinking Michigan State has a culture problem. Culture is such a broad term. I think right now, if they don't get it, remember you had the good year and then you come down to the down year. If they have another down year and maybe recruiting suffers a little bit, recruiting has seemed fine for Michigan State. I don't think it's taken too big of a dip. But if recruiting suffers, then I think you could have a problem. And more people thinking Washington is going to win big time. The contract has been talked about on this channel and other places as well. It's tough for me to imagine Michigan State right now going in there and making this a one-score game. Maybe things can change. But it's hard for me to imagine that. It really is. USC has Washington at the Coliseum this year. So that helps. You look at Indiana, that great 2020 season. I always think of that game against Penn State, right? Reaching out. Touching me, touching you, reaching out. Getting into the end zone to beat Penn State in 2020. Penix carried a weak Indiana team when he was there. What they've been before and what they've been after. Yeah, Michael Penix, he got hurt. Things did pan out. Wasn't able to kind of get back to his full strength. But when he was back at full strength, you see what happened in the right system at Washington. John, Ohio State will be on a mission this year against everyone, not just the Michigan Wolverines. Yeah, they are mad. Ryan Day is mad. Hot seat for Ryan Day. Pfft, give me a break. Buckeye's going to be motivated. Grateful Trojan thinks 3 losses for Ohio State this year. So if Notre Dame's won, then you're probably looking at Penn State and Michigan, unless you see them going on and not getting it done on the road at Wisconsin. You look at Notre Dame. They do. I will agree with this from the Badger and Bournemouth fan. They do have the better quarterback in Sam Hartman. He is the more talented guy. I think we're yet to find out. Kyle McCord was a 5-star coming out, and you put him with an embarrassment of riches, and we could see good things happen for Kyle McCord. Hartman was good, not great, against the Badgers when Wake lost the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Wake Forest had a good season a couple of years ago, and I think he's got some talent. It's going to be interesting to see how it all combines with Notre Dame. Notre Dame's got to play, I think, Clemson this year as well. So we'll see. They got a couple of good teams on their schedule. Tony thinking Tom Allen is on the hot seat. Well, when I look at Tommy, they got to at least, 4? You think 4 wins? A 4-8 season? I don't know if that keeps him there. Indiana's done some really good job in the transfer portal. They brought in some really good kids that I think can make this team better on offense. I still am very unsure about Indiana on defense. That kind of scares me of what's happening on defense. I don't know. I think he is on the hot seat. I'll say that. I would agree with you. John looks like a Badger fan here. No way we dropped 2 in a row against the Cougs. We got their number this year. It's just going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky going on the road to Washington State. Immaculate. Not a big fan of Brian Ferentz. He's got to go. Look, what happens if Iowa, God forbid, has a bad offensive performance against Iowa State and they lose, and they've got, I think Iowa, would they turn around and have Penn State? I don't know if it's the next week, but maybe 2 weeks after that. When is a move made? Remember, August 1st, we change athletic directors. That's something to keep in the back of your head, because I think you would think the relationship still is that the athletic director has the hiring and employment decision over Brian Ferentz because of the conflict of interest. Just something to keep in the back of your head over there. David from Arizona checking in. A very good Twitter follow, by the way. I need to get on that. Well, unfortunately for Wisconsin, Wazoo has improved and the Badgers didn't look great due to their spring game. It's tricky. It's a tricky game. Very tricky game. I'll say that. That's the word I'm using to describe Wisconsin at Washington State here early on this season. John thinking Matt Rule could definitely get the Huskers to a bowl game this season. That's cue for me to drink some water. It could happen. It could definitely happen with that. All right, more comments. Big Time Boiler checking in here tonight. All things Purdue. You may see him on the channel in the near future, as we talked about at the top of the show when we talk about some Purdue stuff. Here later on. Michigan State quarterback Noah Kim looks to be the leader in the clubhouse after Peyton Thorne transfer. Caden Hauser was a 4-star guy coming out. Redshirt freshman he is this year, so we'll see. Right now it looks like Noah Kim is the leader over there, and whoever the quarterback is, I don't know if I put them in the top 10 in the Big Ten at the quarterback when I do my starting quarterback rankings. I don't know if Noah Kim or Caden Hauser at that point. Can they prove it as the year goes on? Sure, they can prove it. But we'll see. Wazoo will be a close win for the Badgers. We have an offense that can score more than 24 points. David from Arizona. Cam Ward comes back again, takes a big step forward this season. Cam Ward is a guy to take an eye, and he was, FCS All-American at Incarnate Word? So, yeah, I think he's got the ability to run around a little bit, if I remember correctly. So Cam Ward could be. And that's a defense at Wisconsin. Linebacker, they're pretty good. But secondary and defensive line, I think, could be a little bit up in the air as well. Gracefield Trojan coming in here tonight. Will they force 2 rivals into our schedule or just stick with UCLA? If so, who? Talked about that before with the flex scheduling right there that Nicole Auerbach reported on that could possibly happen. Right now, if we're just doing must-play games as protected opponents, it's probably just going to be USC and UCLA, and let's rotate the crap out of it. And then maybe some rivalries will happen over time. And we can always bring in other rivalries later. If we go up to 3 protected games, we can always bring in other things at a later date. I think that's one thing that we need to keep in mind as well. Yeah, you talk about the restructured contract, include certain expectations. I think, because of that, he's going to finish the season. I forgot about the contract. Yeah, with all those weird stipulations in it with points per game and everything, even though the defense could bring 2 defensive touchdowns out there and really drive up that metric. But so that's something to kind of keep in mind as well. So he'll probably finish the season. That's one of the more intriguing storylines. That's one of the more intriguing storylines that you got to watch is Iowa's relationship, Brian Ferentz, and what's all going to happen. Can he put a good offense on the field? Can he put guys in positions to make plays? Thanks, everybody, for being a part of Big Ten Ted Live tonight. Segment 0 in the books. We talked about scheduling. Segment 1 in the books. We talked about big non-conference games, and there are a lot of big non-conference games out there in the Big Ten this season. All right, before we get into the final segment, which we're talking about Maryland, can they be a breakthrough team? Just want to mention quickly, tomorrow for content on the channel, going to have some shorts, some YouTube shorts, of kind of stuff cut up from this live stream as well. That's some of the main hits, some of the main things I talked about during this live stream. Friday, I will have my reaction to the Big Ten scheduling announcement. Whatever it is, Friday morning is when that video will likely drop. So I'm probably going to find out what the Big Ten scheduling thing is probably on Twitter out there. So I won't be able to watch the announcement most likely. Maybe I'll make time for it. We'll see. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in. If it's your first time watching Big Ten Ted, your first time watching Big Ten Ted Live, make sure you subscribe. We go live every Wednesday. We got videos. We got content dropping every day, whether it's shorts, whether it's videos, whether it's streams, no matter what it is, we got content dropping all the time, all Big Ten related, all over the place. Wanted to quickly mention something. I said I'd mentioned it before. I just want to mention it now. What's going on in the Big 12? What's going on in the Pac-12? We had Colorado meetings earlier in the week, Board of Regents type of stuff. It was very reminiscent of what happened in 2010. Documents and agendas and all that type of stuff. And so you got Colorado, then you got the news today about the grant of rights. The way it looks right now, and obviously things can change on a day-to-day basis, but the way it looks right now with the Big Ten going with their scheduling announcement and then grant of rights possibly, will we wind up in a situation where the Pac-12 gets their deal done, adds San Diego State and SMU? Remember, it's tough to kill conferences. If Colorado jumps, you got to think Arizona's going to jump. And then what if the Big Ten says no to Oregon and to Washington? I think that's where things could get real interesting. So just some things to keep an eye on. I've been keeping an eye on it like most of you out there. I'm keeping tabs on it because it does affect the Big Ten. It's the trickle-down effect affecting our beloved Big Ten Conference as well. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in here to the live stream tonight and watching Big Ten Ted Live. All right, let's get into our final segment of the show. And then after the segment, if you want to go in a different direction, you want to talk about things, ask some questions, I'll take those as well. Maryland Terrapins, can this be the year? They've kind of been knocking on the door, 7-win seasons, 8-win seasons. They've been right there. Last year, they competed in head-to-head games against the Michigan Wolverines and against the Ohio State Buckeyes. They hung around against both of those Big Ten powers. When you look at Maryland for 2023, can it be the year of the Terrapin? The year of the turtle? Can they flex their muscle slowly but surely? What you need to know about Maryland, they've got one of the best returning quarterbacks in all of college football in Taulia Tagovailoa. But the one thing I want to see out of Taulia, I want to see more consistency. I want to see a quarterback that can step in and be consistently good, that can be consistently great. I think when I look at Taulia Tagovailoa, I see a quarterback that maybe he can go for 303, but he can come down and throw for 102 interceptions. I want to see more consistency out of the quarterback position at the University of Maryland this season. I think that's a big key to the success of Maryland, avoiding those turnover games that Talia Tagovailoa has been prone to have in the past. But the good news is there is balance. There is balance on this team for the Maryland Terrapins. A couple of years ago, you were thought this is a team that likes to throw the ball around the yard, maybe not a ton of balance on the offensive side of the football. But now when you look at Maryland, they've got a stable of running backs, and they've got a guy in Roman Hemby that can break the big play at just about any time. And he's known to bust off big 40, 50, 60-yard runs in this Maryland offense going back to last season. You got Roman Hemby, you got like an Antoine Littleton, Colby McDonald, and I look at a guy like Ramon Brown, top 100 guy in the country a couple of years ago. I think he was the top player coming out of the state of Virginia. Look for Ramon Brown to be more involved in this team. They've got a stable of running backs that can all touch the football, that can all do really good to great things with the football. Now, they lose some things in their wide receiving core, but they do bring some things back. Deshaun Jones is back. And then you got to look at the transfer portal and what they did replenishing that wide receiver room as well. You look at Tyrese Chambers, you look at Caden Prather, I think from West Virginia is somebody to keep an eye on as well. This looks like a good group, and then you got to look at Corey Dyches at tight end. He's a tight end that can stretch the defense. He's a tight end that can do a lot of things. I think he'll be one of the very best tight ends in the entire Big Ten Conference this upcoming season. So there are players across this offense. Once again, offense is not something to worry about here for the University of Maryland. You look at the defense, and this is still, even though they lose guys like a Jacorian Bennett, like a Deontay Banks in the secondary, this is still a defense that you need to keep your eyes open for. Okay, because Jayshon Barham is one of the very best defenders in the Big Ten Conference. He is. He's an all Big Ten guy as a true freshman last year. Led the team in both sacks and tackles for loss. 4 sacks, 6.5 TFL for Jayshon Barham from the linebacker spot last season. You bring back some leading tacklers back in your secondary, Bo Bray, Dante Trader. Now, a big question, like I mentioned before, replacing Deontay Banks, replacing Jacorian Bennett. Jaquan Shepard is a 4-star transfer corner from Cincinnati, all AAC last season, so they look pretty good on the defensive side. This is a better defense than I think people realize and then maybe people give credit for the Maryland Terrapins. Now, when you talk about can Maryland be a breakthrough team in 2023, you got to turn to the schedule. Okay, we know they got Michigan, we know they got Penn State, we know they got Ohio State. They got 2 of those boys at home, and one of them lands in a sweet spot, baby. It lands in a sweet spot. Michigan. That Michigan football game is smack dab between the Penn State game, and it is smack dab between the Ohio State game for the Michigan Wolverines. So even if Michigan goes out there and they beat Penn State and they get the job done in an emotional victory, you got to come back. You got to go on the road, no less, to College Park before you got to play Ohio State. So that's smack dab at an interesting spot late in November when Michigan plays at Maryland. Penn State comes to College Park as well, and that's something to keep in mind. Can they beat a Big 3 team? Can they beat a Michigan? Can they beat a Penn State? Can they beat Ohio State? They came close with Ohio State last year. They were closer with Ohio State than I think they were on the road at Michigan. They kind of 2-score game, 1-score game, 2-score game, kind of going back and forth with that during the Michigan game. They need a perfect storm, I think, in order to beat one of these teams, even the 2 teams that they have, Michigan and Penn State, at their house at SECU Stadium. It's going to take the perfect storm. Talia Tagovailoa's got to have an awesome day. They got to have some big runs. Defense has to get into the backfield and wreak some havoc. Like, I just don't see them going back and forth and tick for tack even when the other team is having a good day. Got to force some turnovers. Those are the things that have to happen, I think, for the Maryland Terrapins to have a shot. But even if they lose those 3 games, they could still go 9-3. You look at their West Division draws, Illinois is at home, Northwestern's on the road, and Nebraska is on the road. They get 3 favorable draws out of the Big Ten West. Maryland is still going to be a very good team. They're going to be a great team this season. but they could still end up 9-3. They could still end up 9-4 just by virtue of where the schedule stands for the Maryland Terrapins. That's where things could land for the Terps this season. This is a good team. You need to keep your eye on them in those games against the Big Three. When you look at a team to watch out for that could consistently pull upsets throughout the season, I believe it's the Maryland Terrapins against some of those other Big Ten East powers. Can they make a New Year's Six bowl game? They're going to have to beat one of those Big Ten East powers. They're going to have to get it done against one of those teams in order for them to get to that level. But even an 8-4 season, even a 9-3 season for Maryland is still progress. It's still a step in the right direction for Mike Locksley, one of the most underrated coaches in the Big Ten Conference. So Maryland this season could be a team to watch out for as well. Want to thank everybody for coming aboard Big Ten TED Live tonight. Really good show. So some really, really good things here to talk about. Talking about Tony, talking about what's happening in the Iowa Athletic Director's office, thinking Beth Gates will get the full-time job there. She's the interim currently as the Iowa Athletic Director. And we'll see how many changes could take place. We'll see how many changes could take place with her at the helm of the Iowa Hawkeyes, because hey, there might be some changes that could take place. All right, everybody. Want to thank you for coming aboard Big Ten TED Live tonight. That's going to do it for another edition of Big Ten TED Live. We're going to be back here again on Wednesday night, yet again next week. So here's what's coming up on the channel Thursday. Tomorrow, I'm going to have some content from this live stream. Could be shorts, could be some video I cut up, so just pay attention to that. For Thursday, Friday, going to have my reaction to this Big Ten scheduling announcement. Very interested to see what's going to happen over there with that Big Ten scheduling announcement. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for tuning in. Another edition of Big Ten TED Live tonight. We're going to see you next Wednesday. Stay tuned. All sorts of interesting stuff coming down the pike here on this channel. Until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.